We are back. Giants baseball, past, present, and future. I'm Ralph Tyko of the Comfortably Zoned Radio Network, and my co-host on this wonderful show is Ian Kahanowitz. Ian Kahanowitz, how are you, sir?
Hi, I'm doing fantastic, Baseball season 2017 is going really well for my Yankees. Not so much for the
Yes,
Giants.
you are a habitual Yankee fan. How'd that get started? When did you go to your first Yankee game?
Oh, can you believe I went to my first Yankee game the first week that the stadium was remodeled back in 1976? So.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I was watching.
Wow,
I was watching them at Shea Stadium in '74 and '75. I was about 4 or 5, and my earliest recollections, the five earliest recollections my father told me about: Mel Stoudemire, Fritz Peterson, Greg Nettles, Thurman Munson, and Roy White. Those 5 were the first Yankees I've ever known.
Wow. And they will stick in your mind forever. I can go back to my New York Giant fandom days, and I pick 5 guys: Al Dark, Monty Irvin, Willie Mays, Hank Thompson, Whitey Lockman, Don Mueller. That might be 6, but you know what? Math was not a strong suit. And they'll stick in your mind forever. For a Giant fan, a San Francisco Giant fan, my demographics on this show vary depending on the time of day. A lot of times when I talk about the New York Giants, people learn that there was a New York Giants, same franchise. They just had a different city to play ball in before they moved in 1958. And one of the things that made them great throughout the years in San Francisco was their abundance of first basemen that were terrific. Have to remember that when they first moved out, the Giants had Bill White, who later they traded for Sam Jones at first, and he was in the Army that last year in San Francisco, and the first year in that last year in New York, first year in San Francisco. So what do? They reach into their farm system and they bring up Orlando Cepeda. And soon after Cepeda, in 1959, comes Willie McCovey. And then they had what do? 2 first basemen who basically could only play first. They put McCovey in left for a while. That didn't work out very well. They put Cepeda in left for a while. That didn't work out very well. They end up trading in what seemed like a good trade at the time, because they were getting a terrific left-hander in Ray Sadecki from St. Louis, who never panned out in San Francisco, is all. Ended up helping the Mets quite a bit in the 73 season, but that's another story. So all through the years, they had great first basemen, and today I want to talk with you about 2 guys, both wore number 22 for the Giants, both played first base, and they both last names were Clark. And they're both incredibly interesting. One they called the Ripper, and one the Natural. So I go to you, Ian Kahanowitz, baseball historian extraordinaire, and give me your recollections of them both and some of the things about their career that stand out in your mind. If you would, Ian.
Well, Ralph, it's funny they did that, but they both wore number 22. I think, in fact, Clark wore 22 from the '77 season, right through the '84 season until he went on to St. Louis. For '75 and '76, he wore number 15. But he was one of those prodigies from high school. The Giants, drafted him in the 13th round of the 1973 Major League Baseball June amateur draft from the Gladstone High School in Covina, California, and he made his debut 2 years later, and you have to keep into mind he wasn't even 20 years old at the time. He was 19 years old, and he really didn't have his breakout season until '77, but. He went into the minors with the Great Falls Giants, where he first played outfield and third base, and he even tried pitching. And in fact, in '74 with the Great Falls Giants, he led the league with 117 ribbies with Fresno, and then the following year he led the league with 23 home runs with Lafayette. So again, Jack the Ripper. Now, Clark came to the Giants as a right fielder, and like I mentioned, he was 19 years old. But he was soon put to first base. His 26-game hitting streak in 1978 is the longest by a Giants player after 1900. He won the Willie Mack Award in 1980 for his spirit and leadership, and, Clark had problems. Like a lot of athletes, I think he let his ego get in front of him. It was evident with the Cardinals. It was evident with the Yankees later on. But for the Giants, he frequently complained about the cold and windy conditions at Candlestick Park, which, of course, was the Giants' home park. And, a lot of them complained. But he even had a rift with manager Frank Robinson and some members of the Giants front office, when Clark was injured. But he was never one to not show his feelings. Clark, you could label him a troublemaker, you could label him whatever. At the time, he did put up good numbers, and he did want to be left alone for the most part, but he was very vocal and outspoken with things he didn't like.
How did his teammates respond to this?
Well, they didn't like it. They thought that he was a whiner. They thought that pretty much, he was more or less like a cancer. But again, this didn't get started until around the early '80s. By that time, his numbers were producing, and why would you argue with numbers that are helping a ball club that really, for years, has been suffering and not making the playoffs? Like in '78, he clocked 25 homers and had 98 ribbies. The next year, 26 homers and 86 ribbies. And he stayed consistent. In 1980, 22 homers and 82 ribbies. But here in 1981, he fell off because he got injured. And, when the bantering and the talk, happened, he jabbed. But he backed it up the year after in '82 with 27 home runs and 103 ribbies. So, it was that constant turmoil that Clark created because I don't think he could stand the heat. And I think, he knew he grew into a very marketable player. And, of course, free agency was just founded a few years earlier, about 6 years earlier, and he knew when his contract was up that he would be marketable to another team.
Right. And he went off to St. Louis.
And then he went off to St. Louis, but I don't know if you want to talk about St. Louis. That's where he had his most productive seasons. In fact, going to the two World Series, losing both. I think they lost. Did they beat Kansas City?
Did he go to St. Louis as a free agent?
I think he did go to St. Louis as a free agent, but let me check on that while I got you here. Let's see. No, he was traded. He was traded on February 1st, 1985. Clark was traded to St. Louis for shortstop Jose Uribe, and pitcher Dave LaPointe, and first base outfielder David Green and Gary Rajish. And then
yes, that turns out David Green turned out not to help them very much. I remember that. And along comes Will a year or so later.
He does. Yeah. And Will Clark is probably a totally different, person than Jack was. First of all, he had a God's gift of talent. He could hit for both average and power. He did play a role for the 1984 U.S. Olympic team, along with Barry Larkin and Mark McGuire. And during the 5-game Olympic tournament, Clark led the team in batting average with .429. He had 9 hits, 8 runs batted in, and tied for the team lead in home runs with 3. He played for Mississippi State University. They all commented on that wonderful swing that we saw for so many years, his sweet swing, said to be amongst in baseball. In 1985, the Sporting News named Clark an All-American, and he later won the Golden Spikes Award for U.S. baseball as the best amateur baseball player in the country. Rafael Palmeiro, who was his teammate. The two were known as Thunder and Lightning. Clark and Palmeiro were known to dislike each other, dating back to them.
Strongly.
Huge.
Let me say something. You mentioned that there were two different personalities. The first Clark, Jack Clark, was colorblind. Will Clark was by no means colorblind. He and Jeffrey Leonard got into it many, many times in the Giants clubhouse. Will Clark was a product of where he was. He was born and raised. He was from Louisiana. As you say, he went to Mississippi State, and they were two different people along those lines. I do have a personal memory of Will Clark when he and Jeff Brantley broke into organized baseball. Jeff Brantley was a teammate of his at Mississippi, and the Giants signed them both. I think it was 85. And they both broke in at Fresno, which was an A team at the time, and Wendell Kim was the manager. And I was the Topps representative that went and signed Will and Jeff Brantley to their first baseball card contracts, obligating them and Topps to use their picture when and if they made the major leagues. And Will did, and he broke in with a bang. Tell us about that against Nolan Ryan.
That's what happened, and his first inaugural Major League at-bat was on April 8th, 1986. And again, Ryan was in the National League at the time. He went from Mets to Angels, so National League, American League, back to the National League, and then back to the Texas Rangers. So, Ryan was in 2 leagues, but at this time, the 86 Houston Astros were a powerhouse. I mean, they took the Mets to 7, and Clark debuted with a home run. A few days later, Clark also homered in his first game at Candlestick Park. Again. Again, he was age 22, wearing the 22, playing first base. And so it looked promising, but then he busted up his elbow, which cost him 47 games in his rookie season. And even with that, Clark finished with his rookie year with a respectable .287 batting average. Now, over the next 6 seasons, and that's up until the time that he left the Giants in '93, Clark would establish himself as the premier first baseman in the National League, bar none. In his first full season.
And defensively, he was terrific. And he was absolutely, and what a smooth swing. He looked like, it was almost like a Ted Williams type swing, that left-handed, beautiful stroke of his. And, 87 they came close. He was there in 89. He was a stalwart for certain.
Oh, and he definitely was. And I'll give you the examples here. In his first full season, he hit .308. He was voted the starting first baseman on the All-State team for the National League every season from 88 through 92. In 1988, Clark was the first player in Giants history to drive in 90 or more runs in consecutive seasons since Bobby Mercer did that from 1975 to 1976. And a lot of people forget that Mercer went from the Yankees to the Giants. I think for Bobby Bonds they traded him.
Absolutely. Both players despised that trade. They did not want to go to their respective teams. Mercer always hated San Francisco. Fans never adjusted to him. And it started for Bobby a trip around the majors and some unfulfilled talent given his demons and what he went through in life. He played for a lot of teams, and people say, well, how good could have he been when he played for all these different teams? Well, he was good, or the teams wouldn't have wanted to acquire him. So when you think of it that way, a lot of people wanted Bobby Bonds. Not many teams got exactly what they hoped for, but there was some incredible talent when he was a Giant, and I think he was haunted by the fact that they expected him to be the next Willie Mays, and there was never going to be the next Willie Mays, and that includes Barry Bonds too. So go ahead, Ian. Sorry to interrupt you.
Oh, this is what it's all about, man. It's about bantering about baseball. And
I know, but I get so much from you, and every time I hear my voice, I'm thinking to myself in the back of my mind, shut the hell up and let him He's the expert. That's what.
But in 1989, good.
Yeah.
In 1989, he batted .333. He lost the batting title to Tony Gwynn on the final day of the season. Chalked up 111 ribbies that year, and he finished second in the NL Most Valuable Player Award, which went to his teammate, Kevin Mitchell. And we forget how much of a powerhouse Mitchell was, combined with Clark, which, again, in 1989, they would defeat the Cubs. They would go to the National League Championship Series. And he had a great series, the Championship Series. Clark hit a solo home run, and Craig Maddox was, pitching against him. And Clark, when Maddox went out with the catcher, who was Rick Rona, to talk about how they would pitch Will, he was able to read Maddox's list, Will Clark, saying fastball, high inside, and the first pitch was a fastball, high and inside, which Clark sent into the street beyond right field for a grand slam. And afterwards, that began the trend. When pitchers began to cover their mouths with their gloves, when having conversations on the pitcher's mound because of that situation. In fact, the Chicago Tribune's the front page the next day after this paid tribute to Will Clark's performance with a headline of Clark's 9 on Addison. So again, Clark faced closer Mitch Williams, who would be prevalent and would give up that home run to Joe Carter in the '93 World Series as a Philly. And in fact, I'm going to have the author of the new book, about the '93 Phillies, on next month. And he had an epic at bat. He with 2 strike fouls, and he kept fouling it off. There was a great duel going on between Mitch Williams, who threw heat, and Clark singled to center field to drive in 2 runs, breaking the tie and sending the Giants to the World Series. And that was the World Series when the earthquake hit.
Right. And let's not lose sight of the fact when the Giants brought up Will Clark, they also brought up Robbie Thompson at the same time. They rushed them both through the minors, and that they were signed, both of those, to minor league contracts way back before Al Rosen. They were signed in the Tom Haller era of leadership in the Giants organization. That's Timmy's dad, Tom, and who was the general manager, and didn't really have much success in his tenure, but did lay the groundwork. And I always try to remind folks when I can, he was the one who laid the groundwork by building the system that developed under Humbaby and Al Rosen, who get a lot of credit, and deservedly so, but Haller doesn't get much credit for doing what he did to pave the way and begin the rebuilding. And they turned into one good ball club. From 85 in Will Clark's tenure, they were competitive as hell. 87 brought him to the World Series, or to the playoffs, and 91 to the World, was it 91, I guess, to the World Series. So pretty cool. Ian, what's going on with the current Giants? Anything? They're in New York now. They played the Mets competitively last night for the first time, and first game of the series. And the way I look at it, when a team is at its lowest in the standings and by the numbers, there's always something good brewing, because they're going to not stay low. This is an organization that doesn't stay low very often. In previous shows, we referred to Christian Arroyo coming up. He's still doing very well. He's making a place for himself, isn't he?
He is, and I always like to talk about the bright spot of any team. And right now, the Giants are being compared with the Kansas City Royals. And record-wise, they are. Together they're playing both inconsistently. But this is what I want to say. Arroyo, if he continues to do what he does, there's hope. There's hope for the season. I mean, really, when you think of it, we're only 5 weeks into the season. We got a whole big season to go, and people are beginning to say, well, it's not really looking good for the Giants. But I'm optimistic, and I'll tell you why. They began last week with a 3-game road series against the Dodgers, and they won 2 out of those 3 games. Second series of the games. But they had a setback. They played the Reds, and of course they had to face, a decent Reds team. But Matt Cain, Ty Block, and Johnny Cueto, they were able to salvage something of it, but Kane allowed 9 runs in just 3 1/3 innings in a 13-3 loss. And Cueto, he was having control problems as well, but they only lost 4-0. But during that series, they were outscored 31-5.
That was disgraceful. That was. I think it was the worst series they've had in their history, and that might go back to New York. What's with Matt Moore?
Well, I mean, it's taking a toll on everyone, I think. I'm not really, quite sure why Moore is, not doing what he's supposed to be doing, but it could be just the whole Sting with what's going on? And
well, I was maybe thinking ahead. Is he holding back injury? Are they going to find something 2 or 3 starts from now and blame it all on that? And if so, it just magnifies that there's no transparency in the game, either between the team and the press, or the player and the team. And it's not just the Giants. That goes back to the Mets are going through the same thing with Syndergaard. Should he take an MRI? Was he ordered to take one? How much responsibility is the team's? How much responsibility of players? And then the agent comes into it too. So it's a changing world in baseball. Let's put it that way.
They're all on Matt Moore that he gets he implodes, and I think there might be injury, but if so, why aren't the doctors taking him out, especially when his numbers are this horrible? But not to mention, it could be downtrodden. The attitudes in the clubhouse, and it just doesn't seem like the same Matt Moore that we've seen in recent years.
Right. Hey, is Arroyo playing third now? Is that what it is? Is Crawford's back, or he's not back yet? And
Crawford
when he comes back, or Arroyo goes to third when Crawford comes back. Is that the idea?
That's the idea. When Crawford is still on is still hurting, and when he comes back, I do believe that's going to be the setup.
Okay, we have that to look forward to. Bumgardner, it might be till June before we get him back.
They really need him. And, a healthy Giants team, again, we're playing with a lot of injuries. You wonder, with Buster Posey, if he is playing with injury and if he's hurting. And you got Bumgardner and a strange injury, which I don't know why these things aren't in their contract to do extreme sports and stuff like that.
Hey, well, here's something. Pence is playing, and he's playing well and healthy. And that's something that they have to be grateful for. Like I say, we're going to look for some positives. And I enjoy watching him. He plays balls to the wall. And that's really all you can ask for. With that comes a lot of injuries over the years, and the fact that he's gotten off to a healthy start is somewhat encouraging. I heard Bochy last night, and he said what you were saying. It's still early, but I don't want to give the impression to the team that we could be laissez-faire because it's early. Because in a sense, it's not early. He said it just that way. He says there's a very thin line between, we better get serious, and it's too late. So let's hope they can, after the Mets series, let's put it that way, on a personal level, let's hope they can get it going. And you and I will be back, same place, same bat channel, same, Al Blumpkin says it best. But we'll be back next week.
We shall, and hopefully by then the Giants can have a nice little run and get back into the division race. It's tough seeing a team that's been this good the last 7 years hobbling the way that they have been, and I don't think there's a need to totally rebuild. They just got to get their key players back, and they just put together a nice little string of wins.
That we look forward to after Monday. After the Mets, they'll leave New York. They'll have a nice flight home. They've had a rough road trip, and I wish them the best. I wish you the best. Thank you for being my partner here, and everybody out there, keep on keeping on. We'll catch you next week. Thanks, Ian.
Hey, thanks a lot, Ralph. We'll speak to you, man. God bless.
All right. Be well.
All right.
Bye-bye, everybody.